all, it seems, go away. Sometimes far away and for a long time from our Father's house. Several years back, our tradition's beloved theologian, the Reverend Dr. George Dole, and our beloved musician, Lori Turley, did a project together, which some of you might be familiar with, of producing children's songs that describe the central tenets of our Swedenborgian theology. And one of my personal favorites is titled, "No One's Keeping Score Up There." This catchy, simple tune conveys the important doctrine that God does not dole out punishments or rewards, does not measure the number of good deeds that we perform, but instead our actions etch out for themselves heavenly and hellish states. That doing good or turning towards God and doing evil or turning away from God have within them their own inherent rewards and punishments. Perhaps not experienced immediately, but over time undoubtedly forming a path, a way of being where we are opened up to experience heavenly joys or closed down to experience the selfish torments of hell. This morning's parable, the well-known parable of the prodigal son, elaborates on this doctrine by adding a new dimension, a new fleshing out of what it is to turn towards God and what it is to turn away, and how humility and forgiveness operate on our path to bringing us back when we stray. First off, what are the ways that we sense and know we are turning towards God, doing good? And what are the ways that we sense and know that we are turning away, and in fact, perpetuating not the good, not a heavenly state, but a hellish one? It may seem as if the two are self-evident, and in some simple respects they are. As are many things in the spiritual life, I believe they can often feel much more complicated. We do all have a conscience, an internal barometer that tells us when we are doing the right thing or when we are not. But the problem is, until we are fully regenerated, this barometer does not act at full capacity. Until we are fully regenerated, we continue to be driven not just by our love of God, but also by our love of self and self-preservation. And so when we are making decisions in the world, we are weighing them based not just on how good they are in a divine sense, but how good they are for us. And not always our higher selves, but sometimes our lower and based self. And ultimately, often things that are good for us are not so good for our neighbor or for the world, or good in the eyes of God. They may in fact rest further down on the spectrum towards perpetuating this hellish state of being, of turning not towards God, but away, of moving away, as it's spoken of in the parable, from our Father's house. This parable of the prodigal son is, in my mind, one of the central parables of the Christian church, of the Gospels. It gives us an elaborate picture of the effects that we may experience as we turn towards and away from God. It helps us to answer this question of what it is to be faithful in the first place. In this parable, the two sons signify two human inclinations, which I'm guessing we all experience at different times. The first, to stay in our Father's house, to stay close to the knowledge that all that we have and all that we are is from God. Or the inclination to leave our Father's house, to exercise our belief that we are independent, capable in our own selves, and to seek to feed that belief by running after the fulfillment of the senses and selfish desires. Turning towards and turning away from God, perpetuating heavenly or hellish states, in this parable center around our recognition of God at the center of our lives, or our belief that we are at the center. To be in a heavenly state is to humbly recognize that we are in our Father's house, that our bodies, that the food that nourishes us, our family, our friends, the sun that rises in the morning and sets at night, that all of this is a gift, and that we are recipients of that gift. To be in a hellish state, instead, is to take this gift of life for granted. To believe that we create our own lives, our own circumstances, that we can manifest them and put our best energy and efforts solely into getting what will satisfy our immediate needs the most. The second type of living may make us into powerful people in this world, perhaps even distinguished and honored if what we most desire is prestige and reputation. But ultimately, this type of living will leave us depleted. If we are acting only from our own resources and not from the inflow of the divine, our resources will run out quickly. And all we can hope for when that famine comes is that we will have the humility, or we might even say the gift of desperation, to be willing to return to our Father's house, not to be served, but to serve, with the hope of being filled again. This younger son who leaves his father's house to live solely for himself depicts that human behavior that we are all prone to, of feeling the abundance of the gifts we've been given, whether it's actual money, talent, opportunity, prestige, and starting to feel pretty good about these things, feel that maybe they are actually ours to hold on to. And from this state, our egos swell and ultimately burst. As we begin to believe that these gifts are ours, the divine falls into the background. We slowly turn our backs, turn away from this divine source that has given us everything we have in the first place. But the younger son also exhibits a great and powerful turning back, which I hope we have all had some experience with as well. When having had our egos burst, when having depleted our own inner resources, we choose to return. Thank God the story does not end with a destitute young man on the streets. While this younger son turns away, far away, losing everything, he does not forget from where he came. The love that was at the source of his very being, that was his heritage. And so when all of his resources are gone, when he awakes in that moment of desperation of seeing his own lack, this low point is the gift which brings him home. This low point empowers him to show humility and to open himself to the greatest good, to his Father's forgiveness and great welcome home. While I wish it were not the case, the journey of regeneration and coming home to God, coming to know deeply and fully that all we have is a gift, flowing through us but not ours to own, requires these fluctuating states of connectedness. We actually must leave to know how desperately we want to come back. More often than not, again and again, in different aspects of our lives and our being. For the older son, the one who stays close to his father's house, doesn't really know how good he has it. When he reacts at the end of the story with jealousy for the gifts that his prodigal brother is receiving at his return, he exhibits a deeply unregenerate state of being. He is going against George's wonderful children's hymn, and he's keeping score. If our spiritual lives are characterized only by following rules, by keeping ourselves in check, or worse, by believing that we are the ones who are always turned in the right direction, we may in fact be stifling our own regeneration. Because spiritual growth and development is not about who comes out the most pure who has gained the most points, but who has developed the deepest wealth and breadth of compassion, forgiveness, acceptance, and love. The one who can eat with sinners and tax collectors, who can celebrate deeply and joyfully for all who return, who are able to relinquish judgment and scorekeeping, and rest in the deep and abiding mercy and love of God, not measured in any way, but always celebrating in every moment when we return. These two brothers bring out the necessary path of life, whereby to truly recognize the gift that we have, to truly know the good that God calls us to, we must also stray from it. We must encounter our own propensity to dive headlong into times of hell, to venture off on our own and leave our connection to God behind. While it may appear at first that the older brother is the most faithful in the story, when his jealousy bubbles up, we see that he has not yet learned the gift of his father's abiding love. And that in fact, we perhaps can't learn of that gift until we have left it. Perhaps we don't all need to fall so low as the younger son, but at the same time, maybe we do. This parable breaks down the distinction between good and evil persons and brings out the necessary mix of both that all of us are involved in on our human journey. Jesus tells this parable in response to the criticisms he's receiving from the religious authorities about his practice of welcoming and eating with tax collectors, prostitutes, and sinners. Jesus' ministry was all about questioning the certainty that was held at the time of who was righteous and who was not. He did not advocate that we were not to seek forgiveness, to seek change and growth. On the contrary, that was at the heart of his call. But he called into question who needed changing. He called into question the idea that we could determine who was in most need of transformation and healing. The truth is, we all turn away, and we are all welcome to return. We are all welcome at the Lord's table, only because we have the desire to eat. All we need to do is humble ourselves enough to receive that spiritual nourishment. Good and evil are at their most simple, just this turning away and turning back. Just like these winter months of cold and dark that make those first warm, sunny spring days feel so good. In turning away from God, we are given the opportunity to see how much better it feels when we turn back. And the heart of that turning, the heart of the distinction between good, doing evil, as this parable seems to suggest, is humility. Being continually humbled to the gift of life, to our inborn selfish nature that we seek to transcend. To be continually humbled to return to our Father's house again and again and again, no matter how many times we leave. And to trust that each time we do turn back, he will be there. He will run to us with open arms and welcome us home.